What would happen if I told you that a quick, nearly imperceptible thought, just a flicker in the mind, was heard in heaven as a powerful, resounding prayer? It sounds strange, maybe even impossible, but listen carefully to what happened when Jack simply thought, without saying a word, "Lord, I'm worn out." Hello, my name is Jax Crawford. I'm 45 years old, and I work as an IT technician at a public high school in Des Moines, Iowa. My life, on the surface, is ordinary, nothing flashy. I rent a small house on the south side, take packed buses to work, and drink lukewarm coffee that tastes like cardboard. I live quietly, passively, like background noise in someone else's story. I've never been the kind of man who attracts attention. I don't dominate rooms or make grand speeches, but if you could step into my head, you'd hear chaos, a constant storm of thoughts, doubts, and worries I've never known how to silence. Since I was a teenager, anxiety has been a loyal companion. Sleepless nights, a racing mind, nerves that tremble without reason, and a tendency to spiral into worst-case scenarios. I tried to suppress it all with practiced smiles and polite small talk. No one really knows how many silent wars we fight inside ourselves. And when it came to God, I thought he was far too distant to notice someone like me. I grew up in church. I heard that prayers had to be loud and passionate, filled with eloquent words or rivers of tears. That's what they said God responded to. Emotional display, verbal commitment, fire on your tongue. But that was never how it worked for me. I tried kneeling beside my bed, whispering words into the night. I even repeated prayers I had memorized from sermons or read online. But most of the time, my lips wouldn't move. I'd just think, quietly, internally. Sometimes I'd mentally whisper, "Lord, help me." And then came the guilt. I thought, that doesn't count. God can't possibly hear a thought. That's too small, too lazy, too broken. He probably only listens to those who know how to shout his name with force and conviction. On certain days, I felt like a counterfeit believer, as if my lack of words made my faith incomplete. My mouth didn't seem to match my soul, but I didn't realize that God had been listening the entire time. It took something extraordinary, something I never could have predicted, for me to finally understand how intimately close he really was, not just to my actions, but to every unspoken cry buried deep inside me. It happened on a Monday, sometime after 4 in the afternoon. The school day had finally ended. I had just locked up the computer lab. One of those frustrating days. A student spilled juice on a keyboard. The printer jammed over and over. A panicked teacher accused the projector of ruining her lesson plan. Nothing unusual, just another chaotic Monday. I left the building and walked to the bus stop, exhausted. I sat on a bench, my head leaning back against the hard concrete wall behind me. The sky was gold and purple, the sun retreating slowly behind the horizon. My eyelids fluttered. I felt myself fading, but inside my head, the noise hadn't stopped. I was thinking about the stack of unpaid bills on my kitchen table, the refrigerator that had stopped working a week ago, my mom's birthday that I had completely forgotten to call about, my own sense of failure. And then, from somewhere quiet inside me, like a weary sigh, I thought, "Lord, I'm worn out." That was it. No dramatic gesture, no hands lifted, no whisper on my lips, just a thought, but sincere, raw, real. And in that precise moment, before I could even exhale, something shifted. It was like a thread inside me was cut. Consciousness slipped. My body leaned to the side, slow and quiet, like falling asleep at your desk. My head bumped the side of the bench. The world faded. No one screamed. No one noticed. People walking past probably thought I'd just nodded off. But inside me, I knew something was happening. A strange, overwhelming sense of release flooded my body. No pain, no panic, only stillness. Timeless, sacred stillness. Suddenly, I wasn't on that bench anymore. There were no buses, no honking horns, no buildings, just light, soft and warm, and an indescribable peace that melted everything I'd ever carried. It was the first time in my life I felt truly heard, and not with ears, but with something deeper, as if heaven itself had stopped to listen. And then came the voice, "Jax." It didn't echo through the air. It didn't thunder. It was deeper, It resonated through every part of me. My entire being responded. It was like hearing my name for the first time, spoken by someone who knew me better than I knew myself. It was Jesus. I don't have the words to explain what that place was. I just knew without doubt that it wasn't a dream. It wasn't Earth. It was more real than anything I'd ever felt while awake. There were no physical walls or floors, but I felt enclosed in love, surrounded by an invisible embrace. I was safe. I was home. Then I saw him, not with my eyes, but with something inside, something deeper and more alive. My soul knew this was the one I had tried to reach with all my silent thoughts. It was him. He looked at me, and in that look, years of shame, anxiety, and guilt collapsed, not in judgment, but in healing. I began to cry, not out of fear, but out of the overwhelming beauty of being truly known and not rejected. I expected a lecture, a correction, maybe a question about why I never prayed right, but instead, he stepped closer. He already knew. "You thought I didn't hear you, Jax," he said softly, "but I always did." I wanted to explain, to apologize, to make excuses for why I never found the words. But before I could, he placed his hand over his heart and said with such love and assurance, "I heard every thought, even the ones you never dared to write down. Every sigh, every mental whisper. I heard them all." In that moment, I realized something I had never truly believed until then. Heaven listens even when earth stays silent. He gazed at me as if I were a treasure, long searched for, a friend he had waited for patiently, without pressure, without expectations. There was no condemnation in his eyes, only love, pure, unearned, and total. And then, as I stood there, completely undone, and yet more whole than I had ever been, he reached out his hand. "Come with me," Jesus said. "I want to show you what you've never seen, but what has always been part of my communion with you." Jesus extended his hand, and suddenly, before us appeared what looked like a window, transparent, glowing, and unlike anything I'd ever seen. It opened, not into a room or a place, but into time itself. Yet this wasn't just a recollection. These weren't ordinary memories. It was as if each frame was soaked in eternal weight and divine attention. The first image that appeared was of me. I was seated in the school cafeteria, shoulders slouched, utterly alone on a day that had unraveled in every way possible. The school's main computer had malfunctioned. Kids were running around screaming. Someone had spilled juice on a keyboard, and I was battling a throbbing headache that made my skull feel like it would crack. I sat there, holding a paper cup of cold, bitter coffee that I had reheated twice. And in that quiet moment, drained and numb, without opening my mouth, I thought to myself, "God, give me strength." That was it. No dramatic whisper, no movement of the lips, just a simple, silent sentence formed in the cluttered noise of my mind. And yet, Jesus, standing beside me in that glowing realm, pointed at that exact moment and said, "Heaven heard this as a cry." I stood still, startled, my breath caught in my throat. I didn't even remember thinking it. But he did. He remembered it with astonishing precision, with warmth, as though he had held on to that moment like a keepsake, a treasured letter folded and tucked in his heart. Then the scene shifted again, gliding smoothly, like turning pages in a living book. I saw myself at night, lying motionless in bed. My eyes were fixed on the ceiling, unmoving, while my chest felt like a rock sat on it. The pressure of anxiety was unbearable. I didn't have the strength to speak. I couldn't even form a sentence aloud. But in my head, I repeated the same phrase again and again. "Lord, stay with me." Jesus looked at me, right at me, with a gaze so full of love that I had to look away. And then he said, "I stayed. I held your spirit that night. Even when you were sure I had left you, I remained." More visions came. I didn't just see myself. I saw others too. Moments I'd long forgotten or brushed aside. I saw myself staring out the window of a moving bus, eyes burning with tears that wouldn't fall. I was thinking about God, wondering if he still saw me. I saw a man alone in a dirty restroom, leaning his head against a tile wall, thinking in desperation, "Does the Lord still care about someone like me?" I saw a young orphan in a crowded shelter, curled up in bed with a thin blanket, whispering in his thoughts before sleep took him. God hears me. Then Jesus said something that carved itself into my soul. They believed they were merely thinking, but to heaven that was indeed prayer. And prayer made in truth is never ignored. He opened another layer of vision, and I saw what I can only describe as angels, tall, brilliant, gentle beings, collecting these silent thoughts like rare fragrances. I saw golden jars being filled with those mental prayers, with words never spoken but deeply felt. I even saw tears that had never escaped the eyes being recorded. It was all real as anything I've ever touched, just invisible to human senses, but not to heaven. Jesus turned to me again and said, "You thought you were weak, Jax, but I saw someone fighting harder than anyone knew. Every thought that turned toward me was a victory you never celebrated. But I did. My chest ached, but not with shame. It was awe, reverence, the sudden understanding that I had misjudged my own faith, because faith isn't always bold and loud. Sometimes it's quiet. It's the kind that thinks of God when lips won't move. The kind that silently reaches upward while everything inside crumbles. The kind that may not impress anyone on earth, but brings joy to heaven." Jesus then led me to another space. It was surreal, like we had stepped into a realm that mirrored the inside of the human mind. Images, feelings, memories, thoughts, and voices all drifted around us. They didn't make noise, but they pulsed with emotion. It was crowded and vast, yet held a sacred stillness. Jesus said, "This is where the fiercest battles are fought, not on stages or in pulpits, but here inside." And in that moment, I saw my own past. I saw the calm exterior I wore, while inside, I was being crushed by doubt, guilt, and confusion. I heard thoughts I'd forgotten. You don't know how to pray. God doesn't hear people like you. Your thoughts are too messy to be holy. Jesus looked into me and said with unmistakable clarity, "Those voices were never from me." Then he showed others again. A college student pacing his dorm, thoughts spiraling, whispering, "Lord, please help me focus." A mother scrubbing dishes, exhausted, whispering in her heart, "Jesus, I need strength." A man sitting in traffic, his hands trembling on the wheel, silently thinking, "God, hold me together." None of them spoke a word out loud, but all of them were praying. Jesus nodded and said, "They are not just surviving, they are winning." Every true thought directed at me is a prayer, even if it lacks sound, form, or eloquence. Then he let me witness something else, something that changed me forever. Every time someone thinks of God in their internal chaos, a kind of invisible shield forms around the mind. I saw sharp arrows, guilt, fear, shame, try to pierce through, but they stopped short, and I understood. Silent prayer is more than a whisper. It is warfare. It is defense. It is devotion. Then Jesus raised his hand, and in the air appeared glowing words from Scripture, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ. He looked back at me and said, "You thought you were just thinking, but every time you turned your thoughts to me, you were standing in battle, and I stood beside you in every one of them." He then stepped closer. The space around us felt like it was holding its breath. Everything was silent, yet full of meaning. He looked at me, eyes deeper than oceans, and said, "Jax, you spent your life thinking you were giving me so little. But from my view, you gave me all you had. Even when all you could do was think of me for a second, I received it as a full prayer." And then, without shame, I cried, deeply, not because I had failed, but because I had finally been seen, fully, completely. I had always thought I needed beautiful words, poetic phrases, or religious rituals. But here I learned I only needed one thing to be sincere. Jesus placed his hand on my shoulder. That touch wasn't just physical. It reached into the layers of my soul. It touched every disappointment, every fear, every time I had stayed quiet when I longed to scream for help. Then he gently showed me a verse from Psalm 139, 4, like a soft flame in the air between us. Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely. And it was then that I realized he was never waiting for my words. He was always waiting for my heart. Then Jesus led me to a place that looked like a clearing, open and bright, as though morning light had poured itself into every inch of space. The ground glowed softly beneath our feet, and above us was no sky, only endless radiance that seemed alive with peace. In the very center of that serene space, there was something extraordinary, a portal made entirely of light. It shimmered like sunlight, passing through water, and yet it pulsed with a stillness that drew me in. It didn't frighten me, it invited me. There was no tension, no uncertainty, only calm, deep, and pure. Jesus raised his hand and pointed toward the light. "You can choose," he said gently. "You may rest here, or you may return." Everything inside me ached to stay. I had never known such peace. Not in all my years on earth had I ever felt this light, this freedom from worry, sorrow, or physical weight. There was no pressure to make a decision, just the offer. The stillness seemed to hold its breath. Then Jesus stepped closer. He looked into me, not just at me, with a gaze that stirred every part of my being. His voice, though still kind, took on a clarity that felt deeper than sound. "But if you return, Jax, you do not return empty-handed. You accept a mission." I stood there, not moving, caught between wonder and uncertainty. My silence gave him permission to continue. "Go back and tell my children that I hear them. Tell them that when they believe they are merely thinking, I am already present. That when their hearts reach out to me, even in quiet desperation, heaven is already listening, even without words, even without a voice." I felt like a child absorbing something far bigger than I could explain. I still didn't speak. I didn't need to. Jesus saw everything in me. And then he added, softly as if writing a final note on a sacred scroll, "The Spirit himself intercedes for you with groanings too deep for words." Romans 8:26. And then he smiled. Not like a king addressing a servant, not like a figure above me. He smiled like a friend, like someone who had always been walking beside me, even when I didn't know it. His smile was understanding, not judgment, personal, not distant. Then he said something that changed how I would forever understand prayer. "Jax, I was never waiting for you to perform well. I was always waiting for you to come." As he spoke, the entire space began to dissolve, slowly, gently, into light. It was like watching petals fall in reverse, being drawn upward into something infinite. And just before everything disappeared into that glowing horizon, he spoke once more, voice steady and full of love. "Now go. Help my people understand. They don't have to be silent, not even in their thoughts." The light swelled until it filled everything. It wasn't as if heaven was fading. It was as if it was sending me forward. I wasn't being left behind. I was being trusted to return. I felt my spirit being drawn backward, like being carried by a tide, smooth, patient, full of direction. My body and soul began to reconnect. The world I had left began to pull me back gently. And then, suddenly, I was awake. I was lying in an ambulance, the cold synthetic smell of sterile plastic in my nose, the rush of voices around me, the vibration of wheels beneath. One of the paramedics leaned over me. I heard his voice through a fog. "Jack, stay with me. You're going to be all right. You're coming back, man. Just hang in there." I blinked. A tear slipped from the corner of my eye. Not because of pain, not fear. It was the weight of eternity still echoing inside me. I didn't know how I would explain what I had just experienced, or if anyone would even believe me, but I knew it had happened, and I knew it would change everything. In the days that followed, I rested. The doctors told me I had suffered a sudden collapse, likely from accumulated stress and a mild heart failure they hadn't previously detected. They said it was lucky someone found me so quickly, but I knew it wasn't luck, it was grace. Pure and purposeful. God hadn't sent me back by accident. He brought me back because there was something he wanted to say through me. The first moment I had to myself at home, I lay down on my couch. The ceiling above me looked different now, like the sky remembered. I closed my eyes and thought, without speaking, "Lord, I'm here," and I wept. But it wasn't sorrow. It was the kind of weeping that comes from finally being understood, from knowing you are never alone, even in silence. My life didn't suddenly turn dramatic or magical. I'm still an IT technician. I still ride crowded buses and wake up tired some mornings. I still deal with broken machines and difficult days. But now, something has changed. Deep inside, now I pray everywhere. In the hallway at work, on the ride home, in the middle of brushing my teeth, and often I don't even use words. I just think, or feel, or breathe, because I now know, beyond any doubt, I am being heard. I started telling close friends about what happened. To my surprise, many of them confessed something I had once believed only I struggled with. They said they felt guilty. Guilty because they didn't know how to pray correctly, guilty for only thinking about God instead of speaking to Him, guilty for not saying enough or saying the right things. And to them, I shared what Jesus told me. God listens, even to the faintest thought, even to the quietest pain, even to the half-formed prayer that never reaches the lips. If it's honest, He hears. I remember again what He told me in that clearing of light. I wasn't expecting a perfect performance. I was waiting for you. Now, when someone says to me, "But all I can do is think about God sometimes," that's not a real prayer, is it? I smile and respond, He hears you, even before your thoughts begin to form. My prayers are no longer scripted. They're glances toward heaven. They're silent acknowledgments in busy moments. Sometimes they're nothing more than a breath whispered into the middle of the day. Because 1 John 3:20 says, "If our hearts condemn us, God is greater than our hearts, and He knows everything. He knows me. He knows you, even the thoughts we bury, believing they're too small to matter. But in heaven they rise like incense. They are heard as worship." This story, it changed my life. Not just what I believe about God, but how I see myself. Psalm 139:4 reminds us, "Before a word is on my tongue, you, Lord, know it completely." Thank you, Jax, for allowing us to hear your journey. Thank you for opening the door to something so real. And to all of you watching, please don't forget this truth. There is no such thing as a small prayer when it comes from a sincere heart. May the blessings of heaven come into your life, even in that silent thought that only you and God know. See you in the next video.